Greeks, gods were powerful. They were responsible for the weather, the growth of crops, earthquakes and storms. These gods were complicated though, and most importantly, were separate, living above the humans on Mount Olympus. So how could the Greeks find the will of the gods? The Greeks couldn't speak to the gods directly, but they believed the gods could make their will known through oracles. Oracles were people, usually women, through whom the gods spoke. These oracles were based at important religious sites, and people would come from all over Hellas and beyond to ask them questions. One of the oldest examples was an oracle at Dodona, where Hellenes would go to find the will of Zeus. Hellenes would write a question on a lead tablet, and the oracle would return a yes or no answer, which the Greeks took very seriously. Even mythical heroes like Achilles and Odysseus were said to have consulted at Dodona. The most important oracle in Hellas, though, was based at Delphi. This was the Pythia through which Apollo spoke. Famous and powerful people from all over the world would travel to Delphi and, after donations, would be allowed to ask the oracle a question. In the inner sanctum, there was a fissure in the rock through which it was said winds or vapours would blow. The oracle would sit above this fissure and rave unintelligibly. Priests would then translate these ravings into famously ambiguous answers. When a soldier asked if it was safe for him to join a campaign, he was told, "Go, return, not die in war." Depending on where the pause was, you could get two entirely different meanings. Or when King Croesus asked the oracle if he should attack his neighbours, the Persians, the answer was, "If you do, you will destroy a great empire." Croesus took this to mean that he would win and destroy the Persian Empire, but when he lost, it became clear that the empire he would destroy was his own. The ambiguous answers of the oracles highlighted that the gods were largely indifferent towards mortals, but as the humans relied on the growth of crops, fair weather, and luck, which they attributed to the gods, getting the gods to be pleased with them was important. So how could the Greeks gain the favour of the gods? To the Greeks, you couldn't just please the gods by doing something they liked every now and then. You had to consistently honour the gods by displaying good character or ethos. Ethos wasn't having good intentions or being nice. It was practicing good habits or customs, training yourself to act in a virtuous way. According to your ability, you were expected to look after those around you, to be generous, to make the right decisions not for you individually, but for the polis, and therefore the gods. If you consistently built good character, then, in a crisis or position of responsibility, you could be trusted to do the right thing, even if it was difficult. Part of a good character was piety, or eusebia. In modern terms, being pious is to be religious, faithful, and devoted. But to the Greeks, eusebia was a broader term, meaning something more like public duty. To please the gods, you couldn't just be devoted to them alone. You also had to be devoted to the polis too. Doing the right thing by your community was doing the right thing by the gods. If gods thought the people pious enough or had good character, they would reward the whole polis. And if they thought the polis was impious or had poor ethos, the whole polis would be punished too. This was a recognition that you were in things together, regardless of your position in the polis, rich or poor, powerful or with very little power. You were expected to consistently do your best for each other, and therefore the gods. Lastly, the Greeks believed that you could please the gods by displaying arete, which means excellence and living up to your potential. You could display arete physically by practicing and becoming good at physical feats like speed, strength, or dexterity. You could display arete intellectually by practicing and becoming good at intellectual tasks like poetry, music, and writing plays. Greeks were encouraged to consistently practice and develop arete across as many areas of life as possible, pleasing themselves, those around them, and ultimately, the gods. How did the Greeks display ethos, eusebia, or arete? These characteristics weren't just internal. They, as with anything good in Greek society, were public. And to please the gods, the Greeks would hold events to publicly display these virtues. All the members of the polis were to take part, and all were to gain the benefits. One of the best ways to display eusebia to the gods was by offering a sacrifice. This was usually in the form of the slaughter of an animal. A ceremony would be held, not within a temple, but outside on a public altar. Animals would be presented, blessed, and slaughtered. In keeping with the idea of public duty, the whole community was expected to take part. The rich provided the animals, poorer spectators were expected to throw barley onto the altar as part of the ritual. Even the animal had water poured on its head, making it bow, which the Greeks took as evidence of their willingness to take part too. The bones and entrails would be burnt, and the smoke rose to the gods in the hope that it would please them. The good meat would then be cooked and shared amongst the community in a feast. Large festivals were also held to display Eusebia. They often lasted for days and included processions, music, dancing, and large enough sacrifices for the whole polis to feast. The rich and powerful members of each polis were expected to contribute heavily to festivals and processions, and the generosity of their donations put them in good standing with the polis, especially in democracies where a reputation for having good character could convince people to vote your way in the assembly. The offerings and feasts fed the poor and created a sense of community, and the different festivals contributed heavily to pride in the polis itself. Sparta's most famous festival was the Carneia, honouring Apollo. Argos held the Heraea, to worship Hera, and Athens held the Panathenaea, to honour Athena. While these festivals had many sacrifices and processions, quite often they were centred around competitions, through which the Greeks could display arete. These competitions took many forms. At most festivals there were competitions held for musicians, as well as singing and dancing. At the Dionysia, or Festival of Dionysus in Athens, a famous competition was held for excellence in poetry and writing plays. Substantial prizes were offered, and the arete on display here is still on evidence through the works of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes. The most prominent way to display arete, though, was through the great sporting competitions or games, where competitors would compete for the honour of the polis and of the gods. The most famous of these games were Pan-Hellenic, where competitors from all over the Greek world would come to display arete at events like the Isthmian Games in honour of Poseidon, Pythian Games in honour of Apollo, the Nemean Games in honour of Heracles, and the most famous of them all, to honour Zeus, the Olympic Games. On the entrance to the oracle at Delphi was engraved the phrase, "Know thyself," something that everyone consulting the oracle could see and would be required to contemplate. Modern thinkers might interpret this as knowing your innermost desires, being mindful of how you feel, but the Greeks knew that to truly know themselves wasn't just about the individual. It required context. It required knowing yourself in relation to something else. Knowing your limits was important. There were forces that you couldn't control, like the will of the gods. King Croesus didn't know the strength of the Persians, didn't know his limits in relation to that, and as a result destroyed himself and his kingdom. Knowing yourself in relation to your society was also important. Members of each polis would know how they felt and what they intended, but this wasn't as important as ethos, knowing how they actually conducted themselves in positions of responsibility. They had to consistently practice generosity and ethos, arete and eusebia in festivals, in sacrifices, and in any number of public acts, so that when faced with a decision, they and everyone else could truly know how they would act, and they could truly know how these actions would be seen and remembered. What was the most important oracle in Hellas? What was written on the entrance to this temple? Did this oracle give clear advice? What could one do to gain the favour of the gods? How did the Greeks display Eusebia? How did the Greeks display arete?